We'd like to call this meeting to order of the Provo Municipal Council work session agenda. It is 12:33, Tuesday, June 4th, 2024. The elected officials in the room are Councillor Craig Christensen, Councillor George Handley, Councillor Catrice McKay, Councillor Rachel Whipple, Councillor Becky Bogdan, Councillor Gary Garrett, and the Mayor Michelle Kafusi. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions, unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called on by the council chair. When speaking, please be sure to use a microphone so that the record is clear and those attending virtually can hear you. Please also be sure to limit side conversations as they interfere with the audio recording. If you need to have a side conversation, please step out of the work meeting room. We are going to approve some minutes. It's proposed that we approve the following minutes: March 5th, 2024 council meeting, March 19th, 2024 council meeting, and April 16th, 2004 council meeting. Are there any objections or requested changes? Seeing no objections, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Our first item of business is a discussion regarding a resolution authorizing BYU Police to apply to public interest certain bicycles qualifying as lost or mislaid property or property no longer needed for evidence. And this will be presented by Eric Davis, the BYU Office of General Counsel.
Worked with Brian Jones' office, thank you, and with the legislature to put something into the state code that would authorize this, simply because BYU's police department doesn't have a legislative body that oversees it, and so this body graciously agreed to be our legislative body for the purpose of disposing of unclaimed property. And but we still need from you a resolution that authorizes us to donate that unclaimed property to a charitable purpose. And as we've talked about doing exactly what Provo City Police does with unclaimed bicycles, which is work with the Provo Bike Collective. I don't know that there is anything too difficult about the resolution, but I am happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Yes.
The only question I have: how long are they unclaimed or in the BYU locker before you donate them? How long by law?
So that's established by state code, and they have their requirements that when they find something, an unclaimed bicycle on campus, they have to hold it. I think they have to advertise for 9 days, and they have to hold it for at least 30 days after that before they can dispose. I might be wrong about the claim, but they have to hold it for a statutory period before they can dispose.
And is it well known on campus where they can go to look to see if they're? You said you have to disclose it for 9 days. So is there like a web page or something that the kids can go and look at, or?
I believe so. I think it's something that the police station.
And then they can just look and see where it's at. Okay, thanks.
And we've been working with Provo Bike Collective, with Michael Hernandez, and with McKinney and Salt Lake Collective, just to make sure that we don't overwhelm them. So at the current one, we've got a little bit of a surplus because we haven't been disposing of them for the last couple of years because of this problem. And we're not just gonna drive up and dump them and then Mike collect it and say good luck with that. What we're working on is just having Mike come to our impound facility, walk through, identify any bikes that they can use. And which we can then deliver to them, and then we can dispose of those that say, we don't want these.
Okay, that's great, Eric. So you are not putting anything on them that they don't want.
That's.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Eric? All right, thank you. All right, next to a scheduling conflict at the request of the administration, we are going to table several agenda items and move into discussion for the posted items 9, 10, 11, and 12, and then we'll come back. So, but it goes in order, right? Okay. So next, a review of the 2024 year-end appropriation request, and this will be presented by Kelsey Zarbach.
Good afternoon. At the end of every fiscal year, finance runs projections across the whole city to just ensure that nobody runs out of budget for the end of the year. Of course, the expectation and hope is that everyone stays within their budgets, but there's always, something that might come up, and we just want to make sure it's addressed, because if a department goes over budget, then it could result in an audit finding. And so we just want to avoid that if at all possible. So we reached out to departments if we were either concerned about their budget or if we just wanted to touch base and see if they had any appropriations they were aware of that they needed for the end of the year. So this list is a mix of some budget shortages that we've identified, as well as some maybe increased revenues that were higher than what departments had anticipated that they would like to designate for specific purposes. So I'm going to go through each line, but luckily the first 5 rows are all related. So we'll just talk about them all at once. So this goes back to last fiscal year. The airport, when we were budgeting for FY24, the expectation was that the airport was going to cover all of the public safety costs for the city, which was the first time that that had ever happened. And so it was definitely a learning curve. Fire, the thought had been at the time was that to offset having 2 firefighters deep at the airport, there would be 1 firefighter at the airport, and then the airport would provide airport operations specialists who would have specific training who could be with the firefighter. So that would make them 2 deep. What happened was airport had hired some of these operations specialists, but then after they'd received the training, they ended up not staying with the city. So in order to get your 2 deep firefighters at the airport, there ended up having to be real firefighters there working overtime, which was very expensive. And so this first line is the projected amount that we think the airport would need to pay for firefighter costs at the airport to get them through the end of the year. The second line is the police side of the public safety chargeback that the airport would be paying to the general fund. And what happened with this one is that last year, when we were preparing the FY24 budget, the officers who had been assigned to the airport in the budget were at a lower pay grade than the officers who actually ended up working at the airport. And so we just started to see right off the bat in the year, there was a discrepancy with how much the airport was going to need to pay. So that's why the police portion of the public safety chargeback would be higher. This has been corrected in FY25, and airport, even though these amounts are significantly higher than what was budgeted, they have revenues that are sufficient enough to still cover these costs. And so general fund is not supplementing public safety charges at the airport this year. Airport is still going to be paying for these with increased revenues. So that is the first 2 items. This last one for airport is basically, if you look at this gray line, the total is about $1.1 million that airport's projecting to have in increased revenues for FY24. And what they're hoping to do with the balance that's not used toward public safety chargebacks, they would like to put that toward a badging office that they would like to start building in the next few months. Jimmy, did I get that all right? Okay. Anyway, so the total amount that would be proposed to appropriate at the airport is $1.1 million. And then the breakdown would be roughly those amounts. Maybe there'd be a little bit of a deviation with public safety if the costs came in a little bit higher, but that's what we're projecting as of about a week ago.
And again, that is money that they have from revenues.
Yes, exactly. So it's not draining their fund balance, and it's not tapping into the general fund. so there's like another side to this public safety stuff because the airport is paying the general fund for these public safety costs, but these actual firefighters and police officers are getting paid out of the general fund. So the general fund on the budget side, they're way at, there's a huge budget shortage for public safety operations at the airport, in the police department and in fire. So we would recommend increasing fire and police budgets by these amounts, but the funding source would again be that airport revenue that's then getting paid to the general fund, and then would call the fund balance, and then we put it in their expense budgets to cover. It's a little bit, I mean, I had to think about it for a long time, but are there any questions about those? Okay, so that takes care of airport. Police, we were just looking at their operating budget. We think they'll be pretty close to get through the end of this year. Back in, I think, March, we asked departments to not rely on personnel savings in FY24 to get them through the end of the year, because we want that money to fall to fund balance to offset decreased revenues. So police has actually been in the past able to use any personnel savings, which they've had quite a bit of, to offset operations. And so they've had to tighten their belts quite a bit in operations this year. And we think that $40,000 will help them get through the end of the year. We're watching that still closely because it's a little bit of a new environment for them, and we're just wanting to make sure that they have enough. And the account that seems to be over is the cell phone account. They're just, the contract amount for cell phones was higher than what was budgeted. And so that will go toward that expense. Any questions on that one?
Yeah,
Councilor Whipple.
just want to make sure I understand. So normally they would have had a little bit of money left over from payroll savings costs. We've told them that money has to go back to the general fund because we've got shortfalls there. So since they can't just use that little slushy bit around, they have to specifically say, we're short by this much, please give it back to us out of the general fund.
Yes, you can give the presentation because
No.
that was beautiful.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, because this is money that they would have been spending anyway.
Mhm.
But we've just
Yes.
told them it has to be relabeled.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. That's a wonderful clarification.
So on that note, though, was this accounted for in the next year's budget that
Yes.
we increased? Okay.
The cell phone contract account has been right sized to account for this next year. Okay, the other area, and just sorry, I didn't say this initially, but the two blue-gray cells, those are the ones that would impact general fund balance. The rest have another dedicated funding source. So the police appropriation for operations would be one of those, and then the second one for general services would be the other. So this $87,000 in general services is to cover unexpected facility maintenance.
Maintenance costs. And those are, I think, twofold. John, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of them, just the maintenance costs for this building are higher than what was anticipated. And that has also been corrected in FY 2025. The other side of this is that new pedestrian bridge by the train station actually has maintenance costs associated with it that the general fund is picking up. A good example of a cost is it has an elevator, and there's an elevator contract associated with that. And so that's an expense that previously hadn't been budgeted for. And general services. Oh, is there graffiti? So I guess our facilities guys are helping with that. I haven't been down there yet, so, okay. Was that, John, did you have anything to add there?
You've identified it well. I would just say that this is a large, complex facility with much more square footage, and we feel like we're getting a good handle on what it takes to maintain it, but it took a little time and a little experience. And so, yes, that I think you had outlined it well, though.
Councilor Christensen.
Could you just give some example of, is it 100 different small things that add up to that, or a few big things that we didn't anticipate?
I think it's a number of small things. I think, for example, if you look at the elevators in this facility versus the elevators we had in the old building, 9-day difference, and that there's cost to maintain those. There's an ongoing maintenance to maintain those. The overall, heating and cooling, the square footage. I think your point about the new pedestrian bridge and the maintenance related to that, all that comes out of that same account. So yeah, I think we're just trying to get a feel for it, but we feel like we're getting close, and we've adjusted this as well in the 25 budget to make sure that we're managing, we're watching it closely.
Thank you. The final general fund appropriation is $70,000, or I should say up to $70,000 in the Development Services Department. And what this is it's revenue that comes from scooters. And the way that it's been designed is the city gets a certain amount of, like, I can't remember I think it's changing to 23 cents a ride. We get that revenue for the city. And Development Services several years ago asked that every year we ask the council to appropriate that revenue from scooters to wayfinding purposes. And so what we do is we ask the council to approve that. And then based on what the actual revenues are, we'll add that to the old year budget and then carry it over to the new year budget so that they can spend it. So that is what the $70,000 would be for. Any questions on that one? Okay, finally, the last four are all related. The golf course has had a really good year and they have increased revenues beyond what was budgeted for. And so there are 4 items here that Brett has asked that you consider appropriating those increased revenues for. So $15,000 would cover concession expenses. So they've had more business, they've sold more food, had to spend money on it, and then they've had revenues that they want to then use to offset the cost of paying for the food that they sold. So that would be the concessions. They're asking for $78,000 to cover some payroll expenses, which includes some comp time buyouts, which are higher. And then the last 2 are more equipment related. There's a range tractor for almost $30,000 that they'd like that revenue to go toward, as well as $25,000 to pay for an irrigation pump replacement. Any questions on those?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
Go golf course.
No topics. This wasn't listed here, but I do want to mention, kind of going back to how police doesn't have payroll available to offset their operating budgets. We're recommending that as part of this year-end appropriation ordinance, that the ordinance contain text that would authorize personnel budget being able to be transferred between general fund departments. And the reason for that is the idea is that the personnel budgets in the general fund have been locked down. And the intent is for those savings to drop to fund balance to offset any decreased revenues, right? But there were a couple of departments that had some personnel overages, and so the thought was, let's just take some of the payroll savings that we know we already have, just move them between departments where they're needed, and then have the rest fall to fund balance to offset revenue shortages.
So your idea is in this situation near the end of the year or when we're deciding these things, you don't have to come get appropriation. You can just use it within and then
Yes.
whatever's left.
Yes, so that would start this year, but then and we'll get to this in the next presentation with the FY25 budget ordinance, but that budget ordinance would contain language that would allow that to happen at the year end if needed.
Okay.
Obviously, the goal is to have payroll savings to help offset the expenses in general.
And
So,
is the idea that it would only be able to be used for payroll?
yes, exactly. So any questions on that?
Don't think so.
Okay, that's all I have for the year-end appropriations.
Awesome, thanks. Oh, one question, Craig Christensen.
I love the expression an audit finding. I didn't know if that was just a euphemism or whether it was like a really serious thing. When you say audit finding, and then we're trying to avoid that, what specifically does that mean?
Basically, with the state auditor's office, they ask our independent auditors, when they come in and review our auditor financial statements, that there are certain things that don't meet within the state auditor's guidelines to consider a finding, and then it's reported to the state auditor's office, so they're aware of non-compliance. And so that's kind of what it's referring to. And then what the state auditor will likely do is, first of all, they'll read and review it, and then they'll send a letter to the mayor to say, hey, we're aware of this, please watch it in the future, and that's kind of how it works.
So an audit finding isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it could be, just depending on the severity.
I would say that it's definitely a negative thing and things that we try to manage and reduce. And we haven't had, we have some other audit findings related to federal programs that we've had in the past. And they typically, it's pretty common for an organization to have at least one or two, because it's particularly a large complex organization like Provo, but I will say for the last couple of years, we haven't had any findings, which is great. But yeah, that's what they are, and it's just kind of, they have what's called a single audit, which is part of our independent audit, and the single audit is looking at all federal programs, make sure that they're all meeting the guidelines that are specified by those programs, and so between those two, we can have single audit findings as well as general. This item that we're talking about as far as overspending budget of the department would be not a single audit finding, that's a general audit finding, but yeah, that's what they are. You got it.
Thanks, John Borget. All right, you're doing the next one too, right, Kelsey?
Yes.
A presentation of the proposed ordinance adopting a budget for Provo City Corporation for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2025 in the amount of $292,856,761. And this will be presented by Kelsey Zarbach again.
So this item is more of a
Preview for when you adopt the budget, the final budget. The budget ordinance is very long and has a lot in it. So we just wanted to break it down for you so you had an idea of what was contained in the budget ordinance. And then I also just wanted to highlight a few changes that we're recommending for this upcoming for fiscal year 2025. So is it? Oh, it's not. I can do it. There we go. Okay. So first, I just want to highlight what the main components are of the budget ordinance. The draft that was in the materials didn't include the final budget amount because if there are any changes to it, it probably would be different than the 295 million number you just read off. But the final budget amount will be in the budget ordinance, as well as the certified tax rates. And those are the property tax rates that come from the county. We still don't have those yet. We probably wouldn't expect to get them for another week or week and a half from the county. But once they're there, we make sure we include those in the budget ordinance. It also provides a list of routine carryovers, just so everyone's on the same page of certain carryover budgets from one year to another that are standard and generally authorized. The budget ordinance also includes a few different areas where the city is authorized to increase or redistribute budget in specific scenarios. Probably the most intuitive scenario is when if a department receives a grant that they hadn't anticipated earlier when we were in the budgeting process, the budget ordinance would basically allow that department to have increased expense budget, knowing that you'd have that increased grant revenue to offset it. So that's an example of something in that area. There's information about the Recreation Facilities Capital Fund and how that is set up, as well as the Disaster Recovery Fund. And then at the very end of the budget ordinance, there are 4 exhibits. So you have the budget, the city budget, you'll have a link to it so you can see what the full budget looks like. There will be a CIP fund summary. There will be an updated pay table from HR and then the consolidated fee schedule. And I think someone asked 2 weeks ago about whether there'd be like a red line version of the consolidated fee schedule available. And that is available. It's like exhibit D, I think, in the budget ordinance. And it just shows you everything that's been deleted or anything that's been added. So that's a great place to find that. Okay. So these are the changes to the fiscal year 2025 budget ordinance. There's a change to the carryover section. There's a change to the increasing or redistributing budget to other areas, scenarios. And then there's also a change to the Rec Facilities Capital Fund. So I'm just going to show you right where those are in the budget ordinance. So this is the carryover section. We've just added a line saying that public safety radios fall under an ongoing carryover. So if the amount that was budgeted for public safety radios in one year wasn't fully expended, then that balance would roll over into the next year automatically. So that was something we had noticed that hadn't been in the ordinance previously. This is under the authorization to increase or redistribute budget in specific areas. In the past, the budget ordinance authorized the city to redistribute sick buyout budgets as needed, but this is the part where we're asking to change that to personnel budgets in general in the general fund and the subsidiary funds. We just talked about that in the last item, but the idea would be if a department was short, I think this example here is saying if the council was short $5,000 at the end of the fiscal year, but development services had an excess of $5,000, then in theory, you could just transfer that excess budget from development services for personnel to council personnel. There's a variety of reasons why. Oh, did you have a question?
Counselor Bogdan.
So Kelsey, does that mean like what we did this last year when we hired an extra, when we authorized the hiring of an extra parking enforcement person, then it wouldn't have to come back to us to supplement it for the rest of the year?
That would be different because if there's any like personnel additions or an FTE increase in any way, that needs to go back to council for approval. And so what happened with you doing the appropriation a couple weeks ago, that's still what the procedure would be. This would be more of a scenario of if maybe development services had budgeted for a position and they didn't fill that position all year, they'd have budget savings there. But maybe council lost an employee, I probably shouldn't say that, but like maybe council lost an employee and then they hired someone who maybe the employee had been on like a single medical plan, right? But then they hired a replacement who was on a family plan. That right there makes them go over budget, because if we had budgeted for a single plan for the employee who had been there when we budgeted, but now we're paying for a family plan, that could make the council budget go over. So anyway, this just kind of gives the whole general fund some more flexibility with payroll for situations like that, but we're not anticipating like, oh, legal's gonna add 2 FTEs without authorization. No, nothing like that should happen. It would always go to council.
Counselor Whipple.
But the personnel savings that go into the general fund can be used for any general fund purposes. They don't have to be used for personnel overruns in other departments.
Like once it falls to general fund balance,
It's
it's part of general
Yeah,
fund
it's
balance.
just in the pool there.
Yeah,
Okay.
this would just be during the current active year as we're nearing the year end to see if we need to shift some budget around so we don't go over budget in any areas.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, I think the last change is just a clarification in the rec facilities capital fund. We just identified the funding or the budget source. So before it had just said the general fund includes in its budget an amount in the general services department for its portion of the rec facilities capital contribution. And this year we just made sure to say that amount is really the rec center's budgeted net income amount that we're just putting aside in general services, so that any excess revenues that might be budgeted in the rec center don't supplement another area of the general fund. It's kind of set aside and available to transfer over to the rec capital fund based on the rec center's net income at the end of the year. So anyway, that's a fun one. Any questions on that? Okay. I think that's it. So that is an overview of the budget ordinance, and you won't be voting on that today, but that would be what you look at on the 18th. So great, thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey. Oh.
Appropriations, when we vote that.
That would also be on the 18th, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I think the bike thing's today, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going on like one first presentation, like.
Brian, isn't that tonight?
No, that's next time.
Oh, next.
On the
We've scoured the agenda and couldn't find it.
I had one last question too. When will we be getting that budget ordinance? Will it be coming out on the Thursday before the meeting on Tuesday? Or will it be like right before like some of the other finance things? When will we get the budget ordinance to review?
Oh, I think
Sorry.
it should be in the,
It will be in the packet?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I think we put it in on base, I think, this last time, but if it wasn't there, we'll for sure have it.
I was just like, once we get, you know, the county numbers and
Oh, yeah,
everything.
make sure that-
Perfect, thanks.
All right. Next, a discussion on picking up required URS member contributions on behalf of Tier 2 public safety officers or firefighters. And this will be presented by Daniel Softly.
See everybody again. Prior to 2020, I know most of those conversations when they say that are COVID related, but this one is not. But there was a significant action taken by the Utah retirement system prior to the fiscal year that started in 2020. The total cost of Tier 2 public safety retirement plan through the Utah retirement system known as URS was the sole responsibility of the employer. In 2020, URS pushed some of that cost to employees, but they gave the cities the option to pick up the employees' portion on their behalf. Back in June 2nd, 2020, Provo City opted to do just that for the purpose of retention for police officers and firefighters, which are the only groups that the state allows us to do that for. At that time, URS required documentation from the governing body, so the council passed a motion to pick up the employees' portion for public safety. If you fast forward to our current situation, effective at the start of this next fiscal year, starting in July, the employees' portion of the Tier 2 public safety plan is going up by 2.14 percentage points. URS requires the city to elect to pick up the increased amount and provide an appropriate documentation to show that they are opting to do so. Mayor Pkwy has recommended to pick up the increase for that group and has included it in the proposed budget. So today I am here requesting a motion from the council to approve the increase and allow the city to pick up this amount on behalf of the sworn police officers and firefighters. The reason I'm here at this council session is the deadline to submit that to URS is June 15th, which is 3 days before your next meeting. We asked if there was any wiggle room on that. We were definitively told no. So we're shocked. So any questions?
Councilor Bogdan.
So with this isn't the retirement package, this is the, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. This is the IRA, right?
No, this is the actual retirement package through Utah retirement systems.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So they,
For Tier 2 public safety employees.
so they don't do it, I'm only familiar with the way that the school district does it through Utah Retirement Services, which is like the last 3 years of your, before you retire, then they take a certain percentage of that and that's what you get.
Yeah, for a defined benefit. That's the same program. So for our police officers and firefighters, they have that plan. And they have 2 options. They can either have all of that money given to them in a 401k contribution, or they can take the defined benefit, which is a certain percentage point for every year of service. And then after 25 years, they can retire based on that. The total cost of that plan prior to 2020 was solely the responsibility of the employer. And then they have switched that, so now the employee has to pick up a portion, but they've given us the option of picking it up on the employee's behalf for public safety personnel. And so we did that in 2020. We elected to do all of it, and that's what we put down. But because there is an increase now, they are telling us that we need to elect for the higher amount. We are not allowed to give less than what we opted for before. We have to elect to pick up the 2.14 percentage points for this year.
Thank you, Daniel.
Around what does that equate to? Monetarily.
25,000 in this next year's budget.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Daniel? Okay, are we voting on this tonight?
Yeah, I'm requesting
Yes,
a
because
motion
we need
to say this is what we want to do moving
Great.
forward. Yes.
Oh, so we're not
Right
doing
now.
this.
Yeah, because they,
So they don't need us to have an official.
URS has said that the only thing they need is just a copy of our minutes that show that you approved it. So we were planning to do the same thing we did last time around, which is if you're in favor, make a motion, vote on the motion, and then we'll just send them a copy of the minutes. So we'd just be looking for a motion to approve the city picking up.
Okay,
So I
Great.
could make a motion and say,
Rachel just got back. Do you? Are you okay on this?
I understand what's going on.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
So go ahead, Becky.
okay, help me with this, Brian. I make a motion to approve the city picking up required URS member contributions on behalf of Tier 2 public safety officers and firefighters.
Perfect. All right, any questions on the motion or discussion? We need a second. Excellent. Seconded by Craig Christensen. Any discussion on the motion? All right, well, let's take a vote. Counselor Christensen. Counselor Hanley.
Yes.
Counselor McKay, yes. Counselor Whipple.
Yes.
Counselor Bogdan.
Yes.
And Counselor Garrett.
Yes.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you very
Andrew.
much.
All right. Oh, you're staying up here. Nope, nope, you're not. You're like, what are you doing? All right, next up.
But I
Next.
will say, I had an amazing hot dog at the golf course, so 15,000. I'm all in favor.
All right, next a presentation on the 2025 tentative budget and council priorities presented by Justin Harrison, the council executive director.
Good afternoon, council. I'm sure you all have read this in your packet. It is really material. So I won't spend too much time on it. Really just want this to be a forum for either questions, suggestions, and really what my goal is to find out what the council wants. Council staff to bring back next week at our special budget meeting, and if there are any changes, additions, subtractions to the budget that has been presented to you. I know this is the first budget process for a few of you. I promise it gets easier. I don't promise that the time gets longer, which doesn't, I don't know, there are pros and cons. The more time you have with it, can be better or worse, but it is definitely a truncated process by which the council receives the tentative budget in order to decide if they'd like to make changes or not, and then have to pass a balanced budget. So what I've quickly done is put together a spreadsheet of the 5 council priorities that the council worked on early in the calendar year, then came together with the administration, adopted these 5 very specific budget priorities, which I think have really helped shape the budget when it was presented by the administration. I want to thank them again. So real quickly, the first priority was increasing owner occupancy. The council had said the part of the way that they had hoped to do this, at least through the budgetary side, was by conducting a zoning update of the code. The council has appropriated funds for this in the current fiscal year from the legacy CIP fund in the amount of $200,000. So kind of moot point, but just wanted to remind you of where those funds were coming from. The second priority included active transportation and street safety, and really the prioritization of sidewalks around schools. There are a number of line items there that I won't read through all of them that are in the CIP. Page numbers are listed and they can be found in your backup material on what these specific projects entail. I'll halfway put Gordon on the hot seat. He's in the back in case you have questions. He's the expert. So those are some of the projects that have been funded. Some are partially funded and some are unfunded, but those are some of the priorities that the council put forward. Third, we have Slate Canyon and Joaquin parking and the funding of an additional parking enforcement officer, which the council did through the current fiscal year for the last month and a half or so through an appropriation from the general fund, but that was also included in the mayor's tentative budget for FY25. Fourth was keeping talented employees here in the city by funding merit increases, cost of living increases, and market study increases. Real quickly, just to give you an idea, and for those who are watching in our large audience, what the cost of those increases are, you're looking at roughly $1.75 million just on the cost of living increase. These are just for general fund departments. The 2.5% merit increase runs about 1.3 million, and then the market study adjustments just under $100,000. In addition to that, there was also a health insurance expense increase that the city is picking up that won't go into effect until January when there are changes made to insurance. but that's roughly $250,000. So when you start to put this together, you see how much really has to go into just funding annual increases and or cost of living increases in order to try to keep employees who are at the city and to really keep up with other cities and municipalities. I don't say this lightly, but it becomes kind of this arms race of who is funding what, and you start to have employees looking other places. And that gets really difficult as your pocketbook gets smaller. Lastly, was the efficient delivery of current and valued Provo city services projects and programs. I couldn't list everything in here. There's a myriad of activities and services that the city provides that are included in there, but I did want to touch on one that has been a priority of the council and the administration regarding public safety, and that was the funding of 2 additional police officers to the tune of roughly $270,000. So really don't want to belabor the point, wanted to get discussion going and see if there is any feedback from the council. You've had a little time with the budget book now. Is there any questions you have that we can have budget staff answer while they're here, council staff look into, and what would you like to see come out of this upcoming meeting a week from now when we hopefully, knock on wood, have official rates from the county?
Counselor George Henley.
I'd like to just hear a little bit from you, Gordon, if that's possible, just about the school-related sidewalk and pedestrian improvements of $755 that is funded, and then the portion down at the bottom that's partially funded. I'm just curious to know whether that represents, I mean, the 500,000 at the top, sidewalk replacement, that's our standard budget, right? So does the 755 represent a new commitment, or is that B and C roads, CIP, if I'm remembering? So is that grants that we're getting, or state taxes that we're getting?
So the 755 is part of our B and C that we're just.
I'm not sure the microphone's on.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
So the 500,000 is what we fund every year for basically repairing existing sidewalks. So it doesn't really do anything for new sidewalks. We do put, that also includes some handicap ramps that we install. So it's basically bringing existing sidewalk up to standard or repairing existing sidewalks. The 750,000 that we show there is to install new sidewalk. Right now, all that money is being committed to some sidewalks at the new Shoreline Middle School. And some of that will be in front of the elementary school. I think it's called Sunset. I can't remember. It's right by Shoreline, but it's on 600 right there. Anyway, so that 750, we have design. We're going out to bid right now to get those approved. And then these other projects that we have, we're looking at some of our big projects. If they in capital projects, if we end up, it appears we're going to have some money available for some of those projects, and we're likely to do a few more of those this summer as well before some of the schools open. So this includes some handicap ramps and some additional sidewalk on 1450 up by Wasatch. It includes some pieces of sidewalk gaps that are missing.
Sorry, you're describing this partially funded one?
The partially funded, so there's some
Okay.
partially funded ones. So we're looking at trying to do some additional work up there and in different places of both.
Do we have any sense of what the gap is there?
How much money we're gonna be
Yeah,
able
I mean,
to
how
have.
much is partially funded mean?
We haven't gone out to bid for all of our projects, so we're waiting to see how much shows up, but we do. Most of them are fairly significant, so only do partials to those, so. I need to come back and tell you how much is missing out.
I guess that you know, the general picture I'm trying to get is, does this budget as proposed represent, I just don't have a sense of how much of an increase this represents, since it was a priority for us. I'd like to be, and we've had a lot of conversation with a lot of the school parents about some of these schools, and I'd like to be able to say, yeah, we're increasing our funding on some of those areas. So that if this represents sort of the standard budget for sidewalks that we normally have, then I don't really have much to point to, right? I mean, it's.
So what you're looking for is I've been here about 3 years. So this is new money that we wouldn't have spent that's different over the last several years in terms of sidewalk improvements. So let me just run through those real quick. So the 750, that would have gone for normal capital projects. But it's now designated specific for sidewalks. We also budgeted in this budget $197,000 for sidewalk up at the Wasatch Middle School. This is specifically for a barrier coming down Oakmont and Oak Cliff. That barriers sidewalk in front of. We know it's specifically on sidewalk. It's protecting the sidewalk, so we're counting that as a sidewalk improvement. It also includes money for a gap between where the Wasatch Elementary doesn't quite, there's a whole home where there's no sidewalk, where we'd be putting that. So that 200,000, so there's a total right there of about $1 million new for sidewalk. And then we have the CDBG grant of about $700,000 to put sidewalk along Oak Cliff and Oakmont Drive. So there's a total of about $1.7 million of money that's designated specifically for new sidewalk. We're going to come to you probably after this budget process with $1 million of additional funding for sidewalks. So you're probably going to see a total before this year's out, $2.7 million of new spending that you wouldn't have seen in previous years. Okay. Where that money's coming from is John.
It's from the tree on Christmas.
From the trees that it grows on.
John came in and said, with the mayor there, and they were going, oh, we got a fifth of the fifth sales tax. You got an extra $1 million. What are you gonna do with it? The mayor, the council said, we're excited about sidewalks. And so what our staff is doing is that $1 million is not allocated today. So we're looking at 4 or 5 sidewalk projects. We're gonna bring what we deem are the best ones forward to allocate that for sidewalk. Right now, it's in capital projects. We didn't have that money last year. Could have gone to road or any other projects that we wanted to. So I would say that this council will approve about $2.7 million, in that range of new sidewalk funding that we haven't done in the past 3 years, on top of the $500,000 of sidewalk repairs that you do every year. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
That was great.
Along with the minutes.
Thank you so much. All right, we'd like to recognize that Councillor Travis Hoban has joined us. And any more questions for Justin or Ada staff? I think that's amazing. What was the extra sales tax from? Because we're behind.
And we're the only county that's in. I was telling you, remember. So it's the fifth, and Utah County is the only county in the state that implemented it. And so once it was implemented, that money, it is got some strings attached to it, but it started filtering into public works. And so by the time we were able to use it, Gordon is just awesome and decided to use it for sidewalks, which I think is great.
That's great.
We're talking and me spending so much time up at the Capitol during the session. Jimmy and Gordon were in the room and I said, by the way, what are we doing with the fifth? And caught them off guard. They weren't.
It was Christmas, so.
And they said, the 5th, what's that? And I said, well, I'll tell you what it is. And so Jimmy started working his magic and found how much money it was. And we thought, that is money we've never had before, that we, $2.7 million total that we can now put towards sidewalks. We've always had to just stay steady with our 500,000 that's barely upkeep, right? So this is new money and it's going towards your priority.
That's amazing.
you. Yeah. Thank
So what about, does every city in the county then get that?
They are.
Okay, all right, great. All right, any other questions for Justin? All right, thanks, Justin.
No problem.
All right, next we have, we're now gonna table items 13 and move into discussion for the posted items 14 and 15, okay? So next is a discussion regarding the 2025 General Fund, and it's presented by Malia. Oh, it's presented by Michael, our policy analyst.
Hello, yes, not Malia, me. Yeah, we had to change some things apparently, but the baby's doing good for anyone who knows.
What's the name?
Name Juliet Rebecca Sanders,
Nice.
born May 25th, 6 pounds, very healthy. Yes, she is very healthy, just like our general fund.
That was a nice transition. That was very smooth.
There we go. All right, so the healthy general fund, so just to kind of explain for some of the newer council members, the general fund is just kind of the primary fund for the city, and it's generally used just to account for all financial things that are not accounted in any of our other funds. So the departments up here on the screen are all the ones that are in the general fund, the council offices in the general fund. So yeah, let's just go through real quick. All right, so first we'll kind of talk about our revenues here, and just FYI, the numbers may be slightly off. This was based off of the tentative budget, and I made this presentation like a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, so it might be slightly different. But there's three main types of revenue for that go into the general fund. We've got taxes, transfers, and fees. For the taxes, we kind of get our major taxes, sales tax. That's the largest source of revenue this year. About 33% of the taxes come from our sales tax. We've got property tax, our B&C road tax, but all in all, it makes up about $41 million for this year. So transfers this year account for about 18% of our total revenue for the general fund, so pretty hefty. But that just shows how well all of our other all of our funds do. We're really grateful for the for those transfers because it keeps the property taxes, right? And franchise fees is just the other form. That's kind of like our water fees and franchise fees, things of that nature. But does anybody have any specific questions about dollar amounts and percentages on any of these that I can go over real quick? No? All right. Awesome. So expenditures. So all these are found in the budget book, but we just have four main types of expenditures in the general fund. Surprisingly, most of it is payroll, about $42 million. Then also insurance costs, retirement costs, and operation costs as well. So the total expenditures, $87 million, right on par with the revenue. So we did get a balanced budget. Hooray. All right, so we'll just go in and talk about the kind of second half of the presentation. We did a fund ratio analysis in the council office. So this is a way to compare different aspects of the general fund with each other. Now, normally these fund ratios are used to evaluate the audit at the end of the year, but you can kind of tweak them a little bit to evaluate the general fund on a smaller scale. And it kind of goes into two different types of resource flow and resource stock. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first ratio that we kind of look at in the general fund is called the operations ratio. This is kind of to determine whether or not we're living within our means. And a ratio of 1 or higher means it's good. So here Provo is just the blue line right there is what we're able to do without our transfers. So if we didn't have, if we weren't allowed to have transfers for some reason, we would be kind of a little bit below that benchmark of 1. But when we added the orange line with those transfers, that is what gets us up to that healthy level. So yeah. Blame the TV. You can't see the legend very good, but I'll try and just talk us through it. So overall, our service obligation is good because we're able to live within our means, and that's very responsible for us. So transfers though are on average for the past 5 years have been about 17% of our general fund revenues. This year they're about 18%, which is can be a little high, but it could be seen as a property tax subsidy. But if those transfers were taken away, the gap would have to be made up by either raising property taxes or cutting services. But since we're able to make those large transfers, it's great for us. And as you can see, just the use of transfers, they result in a balanced budget. All right, dependency. So this is what's called the intergovernmental ratio. It's just taking the intergovernmental revenue divided by our total revenue. If we have a really high ratio of this, it could be a sign that we're really reliant on outside governments like the federal or state or county governments. It kind of depends on your line of thinking. If we have a really high ratio of this, it could mean that we're avoiding tax rate increases. But also if it's high, it could be negative because a lot of those outside funding sometimes have strings attached, or they could just be plucked away without very much knowledge. And this year, intergovernmental revenue makes up only less than 1% of the general fund. And just kind of to explain this giant downturn, if you remember, we were getting lots of free money from Uncle Sam in the COVID years, but now we're kind of back down to a really healthy 1%. All right, solvency. So this is our debt service ratio. Really, professional organizations like the GFOA really say that we don't want to be exceeding 10% on this. Bond rating agencies are a little bit higher. They say we don't want to exceed 20%. And you can see we're less than 1%. So Provo is really doing really good as on the percent of general fund expenditure that's committed to debt services. Because one, we have really low debt as a rule, and we have other ways other than just dumping money from the general fund in order to pay for that debt. All right, our leverage. This is debt as percent of assessed value. Just a high ratio of this suggests that a government is overly reliant on their debt, and you should be between 1% to 2% on this, and we're right in the sweet spot, averaging 1.24% for the past 5 years. All right, so general fund functions as percentage of total expenditures. The darker the green is the larger percent of the budget. So this was all in your packet, so I'll just kind of briefly brush over this. But just police, they were there at the top, but we love the police. And as you can see, the general service is actually negative this year, which is awesome because of the contra expense that we instituted. So just a quick brush up on this. We had 9 departments that had increases this year. 6 departments had decreases, and overall the general fund expenditures rose by 6.2% over the last year for about $4.7 million. A lot of that was just due to the market study, payroll, COLA, merit increases, medical insurance costs, things of that nature. But we were really able to save a whole lot of money with the personnel turnover savings from that contract expense that we the administration implemented this year. So if you guys have any questions about any of the changes over last year, I have them here in my notes, or any other questions.
That's great, Michael. Thank you so much. Any questions for Michael?
That's very helpful.
It is. I love this. And you do this every year. All right. Guess that's it.
Awesome.
Thanks, Michael. All right, next a presentation regarding 2025 supplemental budget requests. Is this Malia or Michael? And this will be presented by Malia Daly, a policy analyst.
Okay. Sorry. So we do this every year as well. This is just the supplemental request that divisions and departments submitted to the administration as part of the budgeting process. This is the simplified version of the spreadsheet. I also sent out to the council the Excel version that has all the notes attached to every request with finance put together, which is awesome. This year there was less requests than normal, and if you notice from last year, department priorities, they always put necessary, critical, and then in past years they had aspirational, but since it is a tight budget year, there were no aspirational requests submitted. So good job everyone. But green means it was included in the budget, and then if it was white, it was not left without a color, it was not included. So I'm not gonna walk through all of these. I did just kind of tally up things here, so you can see that included total and the excluded total. I wish I carried the columns down. So the general fund is that first one right after department priority, and then other funds. So the general fund was included 650,000, and other funds 2.5 million. So there was a total increase that was included of 3.2, majority of that coming from other funds other than the general fund. And then also we included the FTEs that were included, which is 5.5. So I'm not gonna walk through any of these, but just as to kind of, I think this is a good thing for us to look at when we're also talking about Justin's presentation, talking about council priorities and things that you guys want to see in the budget that we compare for next week or follow up on. And then also Michael's presentation about the kind of the health of the general fund, which is great. I think this is just good to see that the other needs in the city that are left unfunded and may need to be funded in other years or funded this year if the council wants, but it's just good to kind of see where everything's at. And finance is here if you also have any questions about anything. That's all I.
Councilor George Hanley.
Yeah, I'm just doing an eyeball at adding up the unfunded necessary requests. It's about from the general funds, about $1 million from what I can gather. Does that sound about right? Excluded total. Oh, look at that. Did I get it right? My eyeball, back of the napkin calculations. Okay. My old math skills are still good. I'm a little concerned about a number of those, but one is the zoning rewrite, which we had talked about. I don't
It's
see.
already funded.
That's already, oh,
This
did I
year.
miss that? Okay.
When we did appropriation.
Oh, that's right. Okay. I was like, I thought that had been agreed upon, so that confused me. All right. Never mind. Okay, well, I just wanted to point out that there's $1 million of requests that are not funded.
Almost 2 million if you count from other funds versus 2 million not funded, but there was 3.2 million funded, which is a lot considering we're in a tight budget.
All right, any other questions for Malia? Okay, thanks, Malia. I like how you match the presentation. All right, we are going to take a break. And we will take it, do you guys want to we take it until 2 o'clock? Yeah.
Wow.
Really
So
tight.
what's time?
Break till 2.
What? So
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right, next we have a follow-up presentation regarding the 2025 budget from library. And this we presented by Carla Gordon, the library director.
Oh, man. Everybody wins.
Everyone wins.
Awesome. Thank you so much for giving me some time to come back and kind of clarify and give you a little bit more information about what the library is looking at, what we're asking for, and what kind of next steps. I think there was a question of what further cuts the library could make and kind of what that looks like. So hopefully I can answer all of your questions. Please let me know if I don't get something. Wanted to clarify kind of what happened last year. You guys gave us $100,000 increase in our revenue, and I just kind of wanted to cover that, what it did, and kind of how things looked. So, when we presented last year's budget, we were looking at a deficit of over $500,000, and our ending fund balance was at just below $3 million. So at the time, we looked at that and thought, we'd like to make some small, over the next 5 years, small increases and decrease that $500,000 deficit so that we would be working with a balanced budget again, which is something we needed to do, and we knew that. So we requested $100,000 each year over 5 years, which we gratefully were given. We appreciate that. But there were some assumptions that I made when I made that request. And the first one was that we would be dipping into our ending fund balance. We knew that we would need to do that over a number of years in order to get us through to when we got to 500,000. I assumed we could keep doing that. We could keep that ending fund balance from going lower than $2 million. About 38% of our operating budget. We felt like that was a safe place to be.
It definitely didn't need to be at one point. It was 100% of our budget. We didn't need that, which is why we have been chipping away at that over the years. It should be down closer to 50% or less, but definitely not less than 30%, which is where the city keeps its ending fund balance. Like you want that in savings. And especially for us, where we have this building that on some years, it just takes a whole bunch of money to fix our bricks. It takes a whole bunch of money to keep things going. And with that fluctuation, we just need an ending fund balance we can pull out of occasionally to cover some of those things that our building requires. So we really don't want that ending fund budget to get low. We were hoping we could keep that above 2 million. And then I was assuming, new in the job, I've been there for 25 years, but I hadn't done a lot with the building. I was assuming our maintenance costs would stay about the same over the next few years. And the final assumption I made is that we would be getting all of the revenue that was projected in 23 and 24, that we'd be getting what the budget said we would be getting. So making assumptions is not always the best idea, but those were the things that I was thinking when I made that, which I got. What actually happened, so in reality, in 23, when we got everything done, there were over $300,000 in unrealized tax revenues. So in 23, we just didn't get all of the money that was in the budget to receive through the tax revenues. Our deficit was $300,000, which is what we had kind of expected. Again, we were asking for $500,000. We were going to be closing that in. And we knew that every year we would be having a bit of a deficit, but that it would go down. But when you add the $300,000 of lost revenue with the $300,000 of what we knew we would be short, it took a bigger chunk out of our ending fund balance than we had anticipated. So at the end of fiscal year 23, we were down to 2.2 million in that ending fund balance. And again, we wanted to keep it between 2 million and 2.5 million, somewhere in there. So this year comes along, we did get $100,000, which we appreciated it. But you can see that our tax revenues again came in lower than what they were projected. So again, this year we are seeing $200,000 less of tax revenue that we are receiving than what the original budget was anticipating. Then we were hit with some building projects. One was the sealing of our parking structure, which had to be done to keep it from falling apart. And it was just getting a lot of water into it. Our concrete was being compromised, and so that needed to be done. But about $118,000 came out of this year's budget year. And then the original projection for our chiller was, they said, between $300,000 and $350,000. And then when they actually looked into it, we had to switch what kind of chiller we were using. It ended up coming in at $560,000. So that was a much bigger building project than we had anticipated it being, which we can cover with, again, our ending fund balance. It was there. We did use.
One sec.
Okay.
Someone online is telling me that the mic's not on.
It's on.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
go ahead.
We did use, to cover some of those building costs, we did use $112,000 out of our legacy foundation. So just clarification on that, there's $2 million in that fund that we cannot touch. So that $2 million is supposed to stay there. We have access to the, we have access to the interest that is made off of it. And fortunately for us, and not necessarily the homeowners, but we have high interest rates right now, so that is bringing in more than it usually does. And with a 5% interest rate, should be bringing in about $100,000 a year that we can use for some of our building things. So that is awesome, and we really appreciate that, and that's going to really, really help us get through the next couple of years. But we are still running that deficit of $250,000, which, again, last year it was $350,000. This year it's $250,000, and that's directly because you guys gave us that little bump of $100,000. But all of that together, the projected ending fund balance for this fiscal year will be $1.4 million. So that is getting way below the $2 million that we feel is safe. 27% of our annual budget. I think it's not actually going to be that bad because we have been doing everything possible to not spend money this year. We're trying to save as much as we can. There will be some payroll turnover that will make that not quite as bad, but it's still going to be dipping way below that $2 million that we want it to be. And that scares us. So, and finance, there's finance. That's just practically see it there. So, in March, we started talking about this situation, and I just assumed we would be, I looked at last year's numbers, I looked at this, what was projected for next year's numbers, of what I had access to, and I thought we would be about $500,000 short again. So, talking to the library board, we decided to just say we need to ask for the $500,000. But in March, on March 28th, I have the email. I got final numbers from finance saying that that deficit was actually $800,000. And I promptly didn't sleep for a couple days. Like, that is a big deficit. And I knew that coming and asking for that big of a chunk was going to be a really big ask. And so we looked at our budget and we found some cuts that we could make to try to meet that goal that I had of $500,000, because I really wanted to meet as close as I could to make it as low as possible, but still getting us a balanced budget so that we are not using our operating, we're not using the any fund balance to cover our operating costs. We just need to have our operating costs covered by our budget. Then we can use our ending fund balance, hopefully building it up a little bit from where it is now, but using that to cover some of our bigger building costs on the years that they come up. So you can see, like I said, the $800,000 gave us all heartburn, and so we really wanted to try to make some cuts. So I'm going to go through what cuts we did make, so you can kind of see where we're going at. We did also look at, this was kind of already in the works, but we did try to increase all of the revenues we have control over. We have no control over the tax revenues, but I have control over ours. So we increased that fee for all of our meeting rooms. We're trying to bring in more and cover some of our more expensive library programs that include food, having people pay for that on a normal cost. Just doing whatever we could to bring in additional revenue.
And looking at what your guys' priorities are, the first three things has nothing to do with us. We cannot help you with those, but the bottom two, I see that it's really important for us to try to maintain all of the services that this community loves. And we're gonna try to do that. The cut that you'll see that we are making does not do that. We are cutting services. And any additional cuts will cut services more. And I just want to make sure that that's clear, that we have dipped into the meat of what we do. We went 22 years without asking for more money, and you only do that by tightening the belt over and over and over again. We run so efficiently. We use our Ziploc bags twice for crafts. We count every piece of cardstock. When there's an opening position, we look and see how can this position, is this where this money is needed? Where can we put this person to do the most good for our community? When someone's sick, we all scramble to cover. We really, really run efficiently, and so it's hard to cut even more. This is the slide from the last presentation I gave, but I'm gonna go over each of these cuts just a little in more detail. So first, we look at the building, and again, because our legacy foundation is earning more interest, at least $100,000 a year, I felt like I could cut about $42,000 worth of building costs for next year, and we would be okay. If interest rates drop down to 0.5% again, this is not sustainable. We're gonna need to put this money back eventually, but for a year or two, we're gonna look and see what grants we can find to cover some of these big historic building projects that we have, and we will just do our best, pull out of that legacy foundation. But it is gonna delay some building repairs. It just, that's like that again, you know, where do you cut money? Well, you can put off some things for a little while, and we will just continue to do that. And just a reminder, these are from the last things, but over the next couple of years, we really do have some big things that are coming up. Our building is just an expensive building, and hopefully some of the bigger historic things, I can get some grants, but a lot of those are matching grants as well. So there's always gonna be money involved in it. And it's something that's it's just always on my radar, that I know I'm gonna have to pay for these things eventually. And I need that ending fund balance to be at a point where I can pull out of it in the years that I need to, and hopefully with any savings, build it back up again for the next time I have a big year with big repairs. So then we looked at our collection. So this is books, both digital and print books. They don't cut 10% of what we buy. And it just means we'll be buying fewer books, or we'll be longer hold lines. Hopefully not incredibly noticeably. Again, it's 10%. We want to have that back eventually. For a year or two, can we do this without any serious implications? I think so. Again, people may notice, they'll see that they're have to wait a few more weeks on Libby. Like those are just things that, but I think it will be okay. And this is a place where we can cut. Then streaming services. These are two of our most expensive streaming services. They are not our most popular, but they are used. You can see there that, you know, 5,000. Am I looking right on? Oh, 138,000 songs were streamed last year. Like, that's not nothing, but that service will disappear next year. Each of these things is $20,000 each. It's a place where we could cut. It was a service we could cut. Will it affect no one? No, it's going to affect some people. But it's also kind of an extra service that people don't automatically associate with library. Yeah.
And do customers pay to get those streaming services?
No. The streaming movies, there's a limit, like they have like 5 credits a month, but the library pays for all of this. So we'd love to be able to offer it again. People like it.
Now, people pay for Libby, don't they? Oh, someone in the email told me they pay $12 a year for Libby.
I think, no, what they meant was they would gladly pay $12.
Oh.
They continue to enjoy it.
I think that's a good point. What about that? What about, I mean, I pay $35 a month for streaming music for my family.
Mm-hmm.
I pay, you know what I mean? I pay $15 a month for Audible. But $12 a year, for example, is extremely cheap for Libby. What about that kind of thing where we do charge an extremely discounted fee?
I mean, that's, we could do something like that. It's not the way libraries normally like run, like these
Yeah,
are the
but
services
is it
we
like
provide.
streaming music and streaming audiobooks? I mean, that's like another level of service, right? It's a more elevated, more cost or expensive service to provide as opposed to renting books.
It is more expensive, but if you look, I think what we look at it like is, we have always provided DVDs for people to check out and CDs for people to check out, and as people move to a different media, we turn to that media. I don't know of a library that is doing anything like that. We either supply it or we don't.
Okay.
Again, it's the people who can't necessarily afford the Pandora like monthly. They are getting that service and the library is providing it.
But not necessarily, right? There's tons of people who could afford it that are using it. I mean, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
sure,
Right.
yeah, definitely.
Okay, just real quick, I think to Councilor Hanley's point, that email, I think was in relation to what the proposed top property tax increase would be, them saying I would pay the $12 in property tax in order for these services.
Services at the library.
I totally misread that. Even though I responded was like, oh, I had no idea they charged. That's interesting.
You don't.
Okay,
I mean, if I could chime in.
Yeah,
I mean,
George.
I think it might.
George, put your mic
Oh,
on.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think there are also a lot of people who use those services who might not use the library at all. I mean, I don't have the need to go to the library to check out books because I'm at a university and I don't have an issue with that, but I use Libby very heavily. So there's probably people like me who are connected to the library, go in and get the card precisely because you offer those services, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know very many people that use all of our services, like,
Yeah.
they pick and choose the things that they most, and our streaming music is not Pandora, like it's long tail kinds of stuff, you don't have the biggest artists on it necessarily, so we can't afford to do that, and the streaming video that we had is called Canopy, and it does mostly independent films, foreign films, some bigger movies, but they're usually fairly old, so it's not, like, we can't, there are things we could do, there's a company called Hoopla that does stuff like that, it's extremely expensive, we've never gone to that, these are kind of more affordable versions of that, so that our residents have access to streaming services, even if they can't afford them. Yeah. So.
And I would say that the Canopy offers movies that you can't get in the traditional streaming services because they are the older, more independent films. And it's very, very fun. And yeah, I'm sorry that we won't be able to do that this next year.
Yeah. Me too. We also cut our attic with exhibits by $10,000. This, if you've been to our attic, we try to bring in exhibits. We do a lot of local exhibits, but we try to bring in at least one national exhibit a year. Those are expensive. They run $5,000 to $15,000. And we just won't do those for a couple years, which one hand is just fine because we have amazing artists here in our community. And also I have amazing staff members who put together really engaging and interactive things that kids do out there. This fall we will do an interactive art thing where you can come in and do art every week. So there's really fun things that we can do out there as well. But we also miss out on these opportunities to bring in National Geographic exhibits. We miss out on the opportunity. There was I put one up there, the Little Builders. It was an interactive, really cool engineering thing. We brought in at 13,000 kids come. Like, you just miss out on opportunities if you don't have a budget to do things like that. This is something I don't think people will notice for a couple of years. I hate to never have money to put up there, but for a while, this cut I can live with. Technology will cut by 30,000. This is fine. We'll just keep our computers for another year or two. I think this is something. This one doesn't give me any heartburn, partially because we did get a very large grant that's going to replace some of our bigger ticket items, and it actually just went up from 260,000 to 209,000 because they added a few more switches. This is going to be so great. We were so grateful. This is going to help us, but everything new will eventually get old. All technology has to be replaced eventually. So over the next 5 years, like, budgets will need to be put back to where they need to be in order for us to keep our technology current. And then personnel, this is a hard one for me. Originally, in the very original budget, so the $800,000 deficit included a 4% COLA matching the full-time for my part-time staff. And it was the first thing I dropped, trying to get to where we needed to be. 75% are employees in part-time, and a third of those are professional part-time, which means they have advanced degrees and they're working. So it's kind of hard to say to them, full-time staff will get a 4% COLA, but you obviously are not being affected by inflation. We're not raising your wages. I think we're fine. We're going to take a really careful strategic look at each one and compare it to prices around, and hopefully next year get wages to where they should be. I think they're really close now. We did an increase last year to get most of them to where the libraries in the valley are paying people. I think we're good. But everybody is feeling the squeeze along with my employees. And then finance helped us figure out that we can save about $75,000 in payroll turnover next year. So they worked that into the budget. I mean, what that means is that our budget is way more accurate than it has been in previous years. Our deficits have been $400,000 and $500,000, but really only $200,000 or $300,000 because of this kind of savings. It's kind of just in the budget. We always have payroll savings at the end of the year. And if we take that out of the beginning, it's just whatever our deficit is, it's much truer to what is going to happen in the end. So, what the big picture looks like is our projected revenues are 4.57 million. With all of that I just said, our expenses, including all of the cuts I just included and I just told you about, 5.2 million, leaving this $500,000 deficit, which is going to be a much truer deficit, which means it will probably take our ending fund balance below $1 million in the next fiscal year if we don't change what our tax revenue looks like. So that's where the stress comes in. The question is, what comes next if this is something that isn't able to be done this year? What further cuts look like? This is horrible to me because every time I show anyone at the library, this slide, we all like, but it would be drawing further into our ending fund balance, which is quickly disappearing. And honestly, dipping into that, that's a revenue stream for us as well. I mean, right now with interest rates high, we get a big bump in the amount of interest that the library is getting off of that balance. And if we spend it down, it's like shooting ourselves in the foot. Like we lose the revenue and we lose that backup for all of the things that the library needs to pay for. So that's hard. We can cut our collection budgets further. That's one thing we have quite a bit of control over. We could just, again, buy fewer books on Libby, do all of those things. We can cut further. It will be noticeable. 10% is going to be noticeable. More cuts will be more noticeable. The only other thing we have control over is reducing staff. And just to be frank, I can't reduce staff without reducing services. We will either have to change our hours, which I don't think anybody really wants, or we can kind of reduce some of our non-traditional services. The attic and the basement each are about $40,000. We can shut those down. That is something we can do. Our outreach services, our van that goes out to the farmers markets and the preschools, that's all kind of a new service for us. It is making a huge difference. It's getting us over onto the west side. It's getting us out of the community. I would hate to see that go, but honestly, that's a couple $100,000. So if that's the direction we want to go, can we do that? Yeah, we can do all of those things. If we want to maintain our services, it just is going to have to be changed. And if it's not done this year, the price tag just goes up next year because we dip further in. Like it just, at some point, our budget is going to have to be adjusted. And I feel like this year is the year, kind of the tipping point for us, for me. We do 22 years ago, 23 years ago, when we moved into the new building, we were at 100% of our mill rate. We are now down below 40%. So I think this is, if I do math right, it's like a 5% increase. So we're still staying way low, below what that 100% would be.
I'm curious, Justin, what is the city below our mill rate?
On the general operations rate. Let me see if I can find out right now.
Okay. Keep going.
That's most of it. These are from the last one. So we are requesting $500,000. We're still leaving $35,000 that we'll either dip into our ending fund balance, or I really think I can make up that in savings. Hopefully the new chiller, we say, runs 30% more efficiently. So I'm hoping some of that comes in power to run our AC. And then just watching our dollars and cents, we want to come in. We would love to come in spending less than what we anticipated. But I think I can do that with 35,000. I can't do that with 525,000. So we would try to make that last next year as well, but knowing that it's never going to be 22 years again between when we ask for an adjustment. We will need an inflation adjustment. We will need an adjustment every few years, just like the city, just like anyone. And so that would just have to be. I just wanted to make sure it's something that I'm like, this will solve all our problems forever. It won't. Again, we want to maintain all of our services. We're going to do our best, even with the cuts that we're making. We're going to try to make it as painless as possible, make sure people aren't feeling it. But that is the proposal that I have. So this was just the end. And again, that's from last presentation. Yeah.
Councilor Whipple.
All right, so I want to make sure I understand the first part of your story where you talked about what we did last year. So the plan last year was to do the $100,000 increase for 5 years, knowing that each of those 5 years until we did all 5 increases, there would be a deficit. But the idea was that deficit would be small enough that you could dip into the general fund balance without getting or not general fund.
Ending fund balance.
Your ending fund balance without bringing it down too low. So that was the plan. It was a prudent plan based on the assumptions you had. But because the tax revenue came in less than anticipated, and because there were additional costs like the chiller, it meant that you had to dip into that ending fund more than anticipated. And so if we were to continue that 5-year plan, we would have that ending fund at an unhealthy low level. And so that's why we need to pivot to, instead of doing the little $100,000 increases each year, just go ahead, do it all at once, and then be done with that for a few years so that we can breathe.
And yeah, that's exactly it. And part of it was also that our tax revenue has actually decreased, and it's not the property tax that has gone down. It is the vehicle tax and the other one, prior year tax redemption, have both gone down by $300,000 over the last couple of years. And so together, those two things.
Okay, so talk to us a little bit more about those different taxes that are funding the library.
Okay. John.
Okay, John. Okay, John Forget is going to address us.
So the vehicle fees, for the last several years, we have been seeing across the board decreased revenues in vehicle fees. And I don't know if that's going to come back. It's just been a trend. And I don't know, when I register my vehicle, costs are still going up. So I can't really explain why we're getting less from the state, but we're seeing that universally. And then the tax redemption, I think Harv explained pretty well. I mean, it's based on people that are paying their taxes late, okay? And when we collect those, and sometimes it'll come in higher and sometimes it'll come in lower. In the last couple of years, it has come in lower. Other than that, I can't think of how I can describe it any further. Those are the other two fees that are impacting things. And I think as we've looked at the budget for this year, we decreased our projection on the vehicle fees so that they're more reasonable based on what we've been receiving. And so we've taken that into account for the information that was just shared.
John?
Yes.
So relative to, since the library is funded through property tax, the general fund is off limits, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say off limits. And I've been with the city now for 28 years, and those 28 years, we have utilized property taxes to cover the difference between the operating revenues that come in for fees and services to balance the library. And that has been a good model, I feel like, over the years. But we do have the ability to utilize the general fund. I wouldn't recommend it because it's definitely not a one-time.
Right.
I think this is an ongoing need. And if we were to utilize, let's just say, for example, the 500,000 this year, we would have to do that ongoing into the foreseeable future until we found a different mechanism. I think the other point that Carla brought up that was really good is that is that the mill rate has gone down significantly because the values of property have gone up. And so it kind of makes sense, but yeah, but it's still an option if the council wanted to. There's nothing that says that you can't do that.
And a question for Carla too.
Yeah.
On the increased fees, have those already been implemented? You had about $100,000 in new rental fees, or is that effective July 1st? Okay. So it's too early to know if you've seen any market pushback on that in terms of rental reservations and. No, but I don't anticipate any. We did a 30% increase, but we hadn't raised it in a whole bunch of years. We're still we did a market study, like we went out and looked at what everybody else is charging. We're still on the low end of that.
Okay.
We'll probably adjust it again in a couple of years by a little bit instead of a whole 30%. Right. But because, I mean, you look at our bookings and we're booked through Christmas right now in our large, in the ballroom, which means like people are wanting to pay that much,
right.
not that far. So
Okay.
we don't anticipate that there will be any drop, and hope that's true. But I really, we're still so competitive with what other places are. I just don't think it'll be.
Okay.
Thanks.
Justin?
Thanks, Chair McKay. To piggyback on the question, Councilor Whipple. So roughly, well, I'll estimate more than 90% of the revenue for the library comes through property tax. They've got very little. The other revenue streams are very small, proportionate to where the bulk of their revenue comes from. To go back to Councilor McKay's question, Ms. Gordon had said that the mill rate for the library, it's down to just over 39% of the mill rate that they're using. General fund is at 8% of the mill rate.
Really? I know expensive all this.
Don't feel expensive. Your statutory cap is 0.001 and the city's general fund rate is 0.007.
Okay.
Counselor Handley?
Yeah, so I just want to also make sure I understand the story correctly. You're also saying that even with this increase of 500,000, we're cutting.
We're making all of those additional
major cuts, and doesn't seem to me to be a lot of promising news going forward, that the 500,000 doesn't get you necessarily back to where we were. It simply keeps us from going further down the drain.
Hopefully that in a couple of years, we can make another small adjustment that gets us closer to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody knows I support increasing property tax according to cost of living. I mean, I'm more and more convinced that it's appalling that we don't do it every year. I think it's wrong. I think it's hurtful. I think the fact that you went 20 years without those increases is why we're in this position. So it was past decision makers who put us into this position. So I think we should not only do the 500,000, but I think we should be committed to doing at least a cost of living adjustment every single year. Not only for the library, but for the city, but that's another discussion for another time. But I just think this is such a shame, because this is a gem in the city of Provo. It is one of our greatest assets. It's a great service to the public. The whole spirit of public libraries is undermined if we don't support it publicly. And if we end up having to somehow privatize it, I think that's a terrible direction to go in. So I just hope we can not only rescue you now, but be thinking moving forward that this isn't going to solve the problem just by, even if we decided to do the 500,000. So anyway, sorry, I just feel very strongly about it. It just sickens me to hear what you're describing, and it just was not necessary.
Thank you.
Counselor Whipple?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about the library being able to continue to offer its services. Honestly, for the city of our size, we should have like satellite library branches. You know, I really feel like we need to have a little library satellite on the west side that we could use as a community center that people there could access. Right now, our little mobile library outreach is the closest thing that we have for that. And it's a really lovely kind of stopgap measure so that we can give services to people there. But I'm someone who's really benefited public libraries, especially when I was a stay-at-home mom with small children, and we were very poor, and our house did not have air conditioning or adequate heating. And so I could go with my small children to the library and be warm or be cool. And I knew the librarians and I knew our family, and we were taken care of. And to have a place like that in your city where anyone can go for the materials, but also for comfort, for safety, for companionship, for all of these things. And you don't have to pay to be there. It's not like going to the mall where it's a place of commerce, or even our rec center, which is great, but you have to pay to get past the little entryway. That is an essential community service. And it serves the people who are in the most need. And I feel really, really strongly that we need to continue to offer this. And I will do whatever it takes to prevent us from cutting our hours, right? Because when I volunteered at the free legal clinic, people don't have computers and they're trying to do legal documents. You can't do that on your phone, but they can go to the library, and a librarian will help them log in and navigate the system. I mean, it provides access to so many essential services. And I'm really grateful that we have this little property tax so that we can have specific funding for the library, and that we can make these adjustments so that the funding that they receive that's most reliable can match their expenses so that they can serve our community. So I think we need to do this because this is how we serve our community. And I'm so grateful that the library is here to do this for us. Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you. So that was very helpful. That was a great presentation. Thank you. And thank you for the cookies.
Chair McKay, just one question for the council. Any specific requests or information that council staff can either work with the library with or bring back?
That's a great question. Does
for
anyone
next
need
week?
anything brought back to them by the library? All right, that was very comprehensive. That was really helpful. Okay. All right, next we have a discussion regarding a resolution approving the 5-year annual action plan related to Utah Valley Home Consortium and CDBG funding. And this will be presented by Melissa McNally.
Thank you. Well, this is essentially the same presentation that I brought to you in at the end of April. And the purpose of this meeting is just to have discussion with council if there are any changes that council wants to make to the proposed award amounts. So this is what was proposed. We did since that presentation, we have received our annual allocations from HUD, and we did receive less between our home and our CDBG funds, about $426,000 less than in previous years. So the numbers up here are adjusted, and the committees voted for adjustments to be done proportionally for the most part, with the exception of our capital projects. So these are all adjusted now proportionally. And then here on our capital projects, that committee proposed that any increase or decrease in funding affect the Mazer School, which is the Utah Regional Housing Project. So those are the differences between April and now. And if you have any questions about funding, I'm happy to answer those.
Counselor Whipple.
So with the proportional decrease to funding based on the less money coming in, does that put some of those projects at below the lowest accepted amount?
It does a little bit, yeah.
What, well, but is it a small enough amount below that that they'll still be able to
I
make
think
it
so.
work?
Generally, they, so you'll see a lot of these, the minimum accepted is,
So a nice round number.
yeah, the 10,000, 5,000, 7,000. So we try to make sure that we're funding each organization at least 10,000. So, so we've got these two that are just under 10,000. So I think, yeah, I think it'll be okay. They'll be okay.
Okay, and that made more sense than just taking from the ones where you had allocated more money than was requested? Or do you know what if you go back to
ever do that, do they?
well, if you go back to the previous slide, you can see, let's see which ones had,
I don't think any of them.
none of them have more. Okay. I
No.
felt like there
And
were
that's,
some
it's a
that,
decision that every year that the committees make. That's,
yeah,
it's up to what the committees want to do, and that's what they chose was.
yeah. I guess I wasn't thinking more than requested, but more than the minimum. So where there was in that range. All right. I'm sorry they gave us less money.
Yeah, me too. Are there other questions about the funding or any changes the council would like to see before this goes to the public meeting this evening?
Counselor Hanley.
Yeah, I feel badly because maybe I didn't do my homework sufficiently, because I think I'm now remembering you had said you would provide, I was just a little concerned about some of the ones that got zero funding and that there was, without explanation, and you said, I think you were gonna provide some of the notes.
Well,
from the
there's
committee, and I didn't look at them. So maybe I could talk to you. I don't know, there's just two or three that I was just.
There's a couple that were not funded. They were brand new organizations.
Okay.
And so when it came down to it, I think the committees decided to not fund the new ones. And
I mean, there was one that got zero funding, but its application rating was higher than several of the ones below it.
right, and
So
that's ultimately what the committee decided is because they were new. They were gonna not fund them and fund other organization that they
Okay.
had passed.
All right, well, I apologize because I know I asked that question before and then I think I forgot to.
I'm happy
Dig
to
through
answer
dig through
any questions that you
Okay.
have.
All right.
Now, we still have Gordon here. I was wondering if Gordon could speak to the prioritization of why money should go to the Joaquin ball bouts as opposed to the Wasatch and Foothills sidewalks.
I have a slide.
Okay.
So the question came up from the council was, or one of the questions, why did Public Works request funding once that they did? So I wanted to just show you our logic in about 3 minutes. That's all it's going to take. So I first wanted to show you the maps. These are the transportation disadvantaged areas. So this is not the CDBG area, but areas that are transportation disadvantaged. So this is something we look at when we're starting to look at the CDBG. This is the actual CDBG area. And what I've done is I've shown the areas where we, wow, look at that. We showed you the areas where we put the 3 applications in. So you can see the 3 applications here again. They don't match up the CDBG area, the transportation disadvantage. So that's why you see some of the changes there. So the first one we put in was in the Wasatch neighborhood. This was a big deal to the school district. This is something that we could leverage funds because there's drainage issues. Other departments of the city are going to be spending money in this area. So it made sense to try to accommodate with the school because all this traffic down to Wasatch is now going to be heading to different a new direction, so we felt that was a good project. And if you look at the price tag, it was about $450,000. I want you to keep focused on that as we go through that. The next one is squarely into the CDBG area. It is the Joaquin area, and we're looking at needed transportation. We have about 8,000 to 9,000 students to go from this area across 8th North into BYU. So we're looking at pedestrian corridors. And again, the pricing for that, and if you go back to the maps, you can see Joaquin squarely in here. Even though this is out of that area, it services the school. So that's one of the reasons they allowed that, because the school is in the CDBG area. And then this last area I wanted to explain, we were told that the CDBG funding was going to be less. In fact, rumors had it that you may only be able to get $100,000 or $200,000 when we were first putting the applications together. And so we were putting applications that were $400,000 or $500,000, which were in the range. But if there wasn't that kind of money, only $100,000 or a couple $100,000, we could do any of these projects for $100,000. So it wasn't like no sidewalk. We could still have an application and do some work and get some things funded. So when you try to do a $400,000 or $300,000 project and they don't have that kind of money, we just didn't want to not try to do some transportation. That's my explanation. And I support the committee. I think they did a good job. So that's. Oh, any questions?
Counselor Hoban.
Yeah, I guess, so I understand there are specific areas, sounds like that even the school board was concerned with. Were there, I mean, just to be frank, I was more concerned about like sidewalks in general, making sure that kids had some sort of sidewalk as opposed to adding bulb outs.
Right.
Not that I don't value bulb outs, but for the cost, it seemed like, let's add some sidewalks. I guess why are bulb outs prioritized over, say, maybe a sidewalk in an area? Because I'm sure there are sidewalks in those areas that didn't get funded or.
So that's a really great question. These sidewalks here will have 7,000 to 5,000 pedestrians a day. Other sidewalks we're seeing in the neighborhoods may have, 10 to 100 pedestrians a day. And so this area, we're really conscientious. We don't have a lot of money. We're not doing a lot of projects, but something needs to be changed through this just because of the sheer mass of numbers. They're not elementary kids, but.
And in those areas, bulb outs were more important. Were needed more than, say, sidewalks were needed. Is that?
So if you look, the sidewalks on the west side over here by the elementary school would not be eligible. In this area that you see outlined, most of the area is all sidewalks. You have the sidewalks in. There are small gaps that we're missing. And you go to this last project, there are gaps missing here. If we could get done relatively cheaply. There were some bad sidewalks we could tear out to widen, and there were some things we could do fairly cheaply because everything's in place. Storm drain, we wouldn't have to tie other projects. So this is a big area. We do not have handicap ramps. This is now the safe walking route. This is going to be where hundreds of kids are walking. This makes a lot of sense to get this put together. We are still agonizing over this right now.
But that one did not get any money, right?
No, it did not.
So why not put the money from Joaquin into that?
So we are just making the recommendations. I think we're saying these are all good projects, and we think that they all have merit, and so we're supportive of the process, of the rules and the policies that the CDBG group put together. So we just presented showing all these projects that we think are important and let them pick the one that needs to go forward. So I don't know if I answered your question, so I don't select the one. We'd like them all selected, but we recommend. More questions for me?
Well, how would that get funded eventually? Do we have any idea how long that would take?
Yes. So, we had told you, or I told you in an earlier part of this meeting, is that we have mayor's Christmas money, gave us $1 million. We're bringing back to you 4 or 5 capital projects that, we're gonna make some recommendations on. That money, that $1 million is gonna show up every year in perpetuity. And so when we show you these projects, and I think it's gonna be difficult for you to choose, we're gonna be making some recommendations, but they're all sidewalk projects. And if this raises to that level, then we'll do this sooner. If the other ones seem more compelling, it'll be later. So that 2.7 million I told you about will go quickly, but there's a lot of good projects out there.
Right now, I mean, that Joaquin has great sidewalks. They have ADA ramps and everything. I don't know. I would like to move the money from the Joaquin bulb outs to the safe routes to school. I think it just makes more sense to have it where kids are walking to school.
And that's certainly a decision of the council. I think it'd be important to look at the recommendations that the committee made. And
I was sitting in the meeting, so I was there.
okay, I was not sitting there.
Yes.
So,
Well, the only issue, I mean, if you could go back to the bulb outs image for a second. I mean, so I commute very frequently on Second East, where there are bulb outs. And I mean, it's not only, 500 North has to be one of the most perilous streets in Provo. Because it has the same problem that Slate Canyon Drive has, where there's just cars all the way along. So the blind spots are everywhere. Most people are distracted drivers, and there are a ton of pedestrians. So I do think for bang for your buck, you're going to get a lot of safety out of that. And we have had a fatality not too far from 500 North, where, bulb outs might have been a difference maker. So I mean, I don't like choosing between either of those projects, because they both seem to me to be very, very important. But I am compelled by the traffic numbers on this street as being pretty crucial to the safety of the pedestrians there, because the bulb outs will effectively slow that traffic down significantly. It certainly has been the result on Second East. It's a much safer road because of those bulb outs. It just pinches everything. So every driver I rarely see anybody exceeding 25 anymore on that street. But 500 North, I will not drive on. I think and I won't ride my bike on. I think it's terribly dangerous. So I don't know. That's to say, they're both. I mean, I live in the other neighborhood, and certainly I would love to see those improvements there. But I suspect that in the early mornings or 2 in the afternoon after school, you're not going to have the kind of car traffic that couldn't create such perilous situations as you might have here. I don't know. I hate comparing them, but I just want to fund it all. So yeah. I mean, I guess I'm just nervous that if we say, okay, we're going, but you're saying we'd have CDBG funds next year. We'd have the city funds next year. We can make these decisions and maybe fund both of those within a 2-year period.
We'll keep bringing you
projects
with the money that's available.
Yeah.
We did receive CDBG funding last year that right now we're in design for. We've kind of designated a couple of these corridors. So we have some funding. We already put some new bulb outs out in this area next year, and we're thinking of just keeping that momentum going to try to, again, I'm glad we're bringing you compelling projects. We'd rather bring you ones that you struggle with, and we're more than happy to build either one. So I'm not debating with you.
Councilor Hoban.
Can we go back to the one with all the sidewalks? Yeah. So those get how much traffic would you say, like each of those sidewalks? Is that where you were like maybe 10 to 100 people type?
Yeah, they're smaller, but they were in budget amounts that may have been what would have constrained us with, because it may have been that we were only allocated $100,000 or $200,000, if then the other projects would fall off the list and we'd had nothing to be competing with.
I was looking at what's the foot traffic
Oh.
on those?
And how do you pick which street to
That's
start?
minimal, and in there, most of them, they have sidewalks, they just may not be in good repair, so that was like lowest on the list. The other
So-
one was just Wasatch.
So we're choosing between bulb outs. We're not choosing between sidewalks and bulb outs.
The Wasatch one is.
The Wasatch one is
Sorry.
sold out and sidewalks.
It's by bulb outs and sidewalks.
That,
Bulb outs.
Wasatch.
Oh,
We
okay,
do
so-
not have handicap ramps here, we have missing sidewalk, or we have problems here. Poor drainage, so there's a couple things there's a lot of problems here. And sidewalks, one of them.
Counselor Whipple.
Yeah, I would love to get this fixed, but I'm very familiar with the intersection of 400 East and 5th North in Joaquin. Like, I will not go north-south on 4th East because I don't want to cross 5th North. The sight lines are terrible and bulb outs will help with that. I'm actually wondering, does it not warrant a traffic signal there? On
East, so
4th East and 5th North? Because the 4th East is one of our more major streets. Okay,
So I suspect it doesn't, that's why we're looking at
Okay,
this.
Yeah, you wouldn't be doing that if it warranted.
yeah, I don't cross that one as a pedestrian or on my bike or even in the car. It's a really scary intersection. And the fact that the usage on that is more than an order of magnitude greater than the usage for any of these streets, I think is really important. Joaquin is just a super, super high traffic area for all forms of transportation. That's all I got there.
Okay, any other questions for Melissa? All right, thanks, Melissa. Okay, next, discussion regarding an ordinance amending the zone map classification of property at 2662 West Lakeview Parkway for open space preservation recreation zone to community shopping center zone. And this will be presented by Keith Maury.
It's a pleasure to be with you. So I want to just set the stage a little bit, maybe from how this was kind of handled in the past. I'm just going to move to that slide first and go back. One of the things that I think is important to kind of talk about to set the context for this is, especially with the national global economy the way it is, one of the things that becomes really important is trying to stabilize our tax base and our revenue stream in a way that lets us mitigate for ebbs and flows in the economy, right? Some of these bullet points are pretty important in that environment. 52% of our property, as you all know, we talk about it quite a bit, isn't taxable. And so looking for ways to kind of solve for that are a constant issue that we address. Are there places that we can find property that hasn't historically generated property taxes that we can flip that narrative a little bit? Are there places where we can create sales tax where we aren't creating sales tax currently? All those things become really important. And so the regional sports park became a focal point. And when I first started here, Doug and Scott both pulled me aside and said, look, we're pursuing this regional sports complex and we think there's an economic impact. And we think we ought to be partnered together in our conversations about this. What do you think? And I said, well, let's talk about that a little bit. And after we talked about the numbers and what they were going to accomplish there, I was like, well, yeah, obviously we should be partnered because your message and your agenda on this project are the same as mine. The regional sports park is going to bring, somewhere around $30 million to the local economy on a regular basis. Well, one of the things we've always anticipated for the West Side has been this concept of a commercial component at the south end of the park to support that. And I'm going to skip ahead again because this isn't anything new. When we did the future land use map for the West Side, we anticipated that there would be nodes of higher density and commercial development in different places around the West Side. We also knew when we adopted that some of those nodes might shift depending on what happened to the economy or which properties developed sooner than others or whatever. We also anticipated, and it's a little bit difficult to tell, but this kind of diagonally hatched property in proximity to the airport, we adopted an airport overlay, which kind of designated the types of uses that we would support in that area, which would primarily be industrial, commercial, those types of things that wouldn't have a negative impact on the airport, but would be a positive impact. So I'm just trying to help everybody understand the concept of this little triangle is not a new concept. It's something that we've talked about and anticipated for a long time. So that 5-acre parcel was intended to address the commercial needs of that kind of high density, high traffic environment that would be created by the regional sports park with all the people that are there. You know, we're trying to create an environment where those people have access to resources that they're going to need proximate to the regional sports complex without having to get in their car and drive someplace else. So kind of looking through those figures again, the park's projected to draw about 78,000 visitors annually. The airport itself is going to generate about 3.3 million travelers annually or trips annually. The park and the airport both together kind of create this nexus of a commercial kind of core in that area. We're going to continue to build on that with what we're hoping to do at Lakeview Parkway and 15, the commercial property that we have rezoned there. And it's also important to know that, again, because this isn't new, this little triangular piece at the bottom was never included in the conservation plan, water conservation plan for the park, because it was always intended to be a little, sorry.
Counselor Becky Bogdan has a question.
Not necessarily a question as much as a comment. So the residents there, they're not getting caught up in doing a commercial. What they're getting caught up in is in some old plans, this was reserved for parking. And they're terrified that if there's no parking on this bottom end, that they're gonna park in front of their houses. But I think if we go back to the slide prior. Can we go back to the slide prior? Don't we have a commercial node up there in the north that kind of buffers that from the neighborhood, that purple blob?
Yeah, so that's what I was referencing. The future land use map anticipated that there would be higher density mixed use development, commercial nodes in different places on the west side. I don't think anybody ever kind of said that these were set in stone. That's exactly where they would be. And so my point was whether that nexus happens here at the corner of the regional sports park, or whether it happens farther east along Lakeview Parkway, I don't think anybody ever had the foresight to be able to say it's exactly going to be here. And so I think what we're saying now, based on the development, the impact of the airport and the regional sports complex, the opportunity needs to be here, because otherwise they've got to drive farther through other neighborhoods to get to here. So that's why this was always intended to be there. My understanding of one of the things that the Parks Department did when they were developing the plans for the regional sports complex was to carve that triangle out and just put a placeholder as parking. But if you let me finish, some of the things that I think are important to understand is the regional sports complex was designed to, the national standard, for example, for soccer parking for a soccer field is about 70 parking stalls per field. The park that we're building right now has been designed with 81 parking stalls per field. So if you play that out over the whole 100-acre site, we've got about almost 250 additional parking stalls above what the national standard would say we actually need. So if we want to get into this discussion or debate about parking, I'm concerned a little bit about that, because I think we could begin to get pushback from the opposite direction, telling us you got too much, give some of it back. And I think we were trying to be very thoughtful and rigorous about what our plan was to anticipate all the intended uses. Right now, at a lot of our recreation facilities, we have a situation where people will come to those facilities in buses or multiple buses, and we'll drop patrons off at the rec center, for example, and then the buses leave. They go wherever they're gonna go for the day. I mean, maybe the bus driver goes and gets a hot dog or a hamburger or shops at the mall or whatever, and then they come back when the time is done to pick up the students or whoever it is, the patrons at the rec center. This is gonna be similar. I mean, because we haven't built it yet, when we actually start to plan for events that will happen at the regional sports complex, we'll be very methodical about who's coming, how are they coming, where are they going to park, where do they need to be directed to park other places. But the other thing to remember, as we thought about the plan for the regional sports park.
Hey, Keith, Becky has another question, please.
I'm sorry.
But no, it's okay. But parking is already a part of the problem. I mean, this is already part of the conversation. Just because it's not a part of the council conversation at this point, it is a part of the conversation. It's been a part of every single constituent conversation I've had is the traffic and the parking, and that they brought up in the neighborhood meeting.
So I have to address what we're thinking of to address that, or what's already been planned to address that.
Well, what I want to do is two things here. Is one concern that was brought up is that property that Tara's been working on that we've seen before with the Carters, the one up by the pump house, just up on 6th and where that tees down. That was brought up that Parks wants to take that and park buses on it. And the concern with that is that then the buses will start going through the neighborhoods and past the schools instead of on the parkway. So that's a huge concern. The other one is, like we brought up before, that they're taking away this node when they're terrified that the parking is going to spill up higher. And so those are things that we're gonna have to address here.
Let's let him finish everything and we'll know, because he had, let him finish his.
So a couple of things we've done to kind of address some of the flow already. The addressing for the regional sports complex was designed so that it's on the south end of Lakeview Parkway. So when someone pulls up, how do I get to the Provo City Regional Sports Complex? The addressing is going to send them to Lakeview Parkway. It's not going to send them down Center Street. It's going to send them the farther south point because that's where the address is for the Regional Sports Complex. As your freeway directional signage will direct people to exit off of the freeway on Lakeview Parkway, not onto Center Street. Traffic from the park and the commercial property will be directed to Lakeview Parkway. No parking is permitted along any of the exterior roads around the regional sports park to encourage people to move into the park, to park within the designated parking that we've designed there.
Oh, so it's gonna be all no parking on.
Correct.
Championship Drive.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right. 2 traffic signals have been installed on the south end of the park to kind of designate where people can park. It's fascinating to me. You know, we romanticize how wonderful Europe is. And then when we talk about what it is that made Europe incredible, it's how proximate you are to the local market or the pub or the bakery or the meat market. But when we try to recreate that here, we all get pinched up about having commercial opportunities next to residential. Well, that's exactly what this is supposed to do. It's supposed to solve for the fact that if the commercial opportunity and demands of the regional sports park are built here, they won't have to go through the neighborhood. There's no reason for them to go up to Center Street. If they're going to do anything, they're probably going to get on Lakeview Parkway to go to Freddy's over by the mall, or to go by to the mall, or to go to Sam's Club, or to go wherever. So we've tried to be thoughtful about how do we mitigate for all these impacts, because here's what's important to understand. Every economy, I mean, every city that really does economic development well and has all the tools in their bag, will tell you the tourist dollars are the best kinds of dollars, right? Because it's an impact on a foreigner who's going to come into your community and spend money in your community and then leave. So you get all the benefits of their money and very little impact with them living in your community on a day-to-day basis. Well, that's kind of what the regional sports park does in the best kind of a way. People have the opportunity to fly into our airport, go across the street almost to the regional sports park for a tournament, find a place to a hotel to stay, hopefully here on the south end of the regional sports complex or right around that, spend their tax dollars and then fly out and go home. It doesn't get a lot better than that. And again, the thing that it really does for us is it allows us to kind of mitigate against the other ebbs and flows in the economy. I know that we're all stressed and worried about what's happening with this sales tax dollars and economic development. We're worried about that too. The only way to mitigate that is to build more. The more of it we have, the more we can absorb the ebbs and flows of the impacts that we see. The more the more that revenue stream that we have, if one of them lags, the other one will compensate for it. This is crucially important to what we're trying to accomplish at the regional sports park, at the mall, and along Lakeview Parkway, because the developer that we're talking about partnering with has the opportunity to bring other tenants in there, like a potential hotel and other commercial users that will be essential to the success of that park. So, I've got a little bit sidetracked. I don't know if I've answered all your questions, but I'm happy to redirect or try to answer whatever I might have missed.
All right. Any questions for Keith? Doug, you answer questions too? All right, ask away. You can use that on the.
Okay, Doug, how true is it that that corner? I'll just fix out.
North corner.
Yeah, it's not gonna be on this side, it's gonna be up in South, all the way up there. I know when I talked to Tara last, they were just gonna try to leave it, and maybe sell it as a home lot for development for housing. And I've been told that people have been speaking with people in your department that say that we're just gonna use that for a bus parking opportunity.
Maybe I can clarify misconception there. We're not planning on using that as bus parking. That's a maintenance shed that there will be fully fenced in and it's kind of secure. That's where we'll keep all of our units to maintain this. So we really do, as Keith said, plan to, it'll be very rare when we have a 20 field tournament using all of them. But when we do, we'll make arrangements to make sure we have, like bus off-site parking. We have 57 other parks with parking lots and other options throughout town, but we can have buses come in and load and then we alleviate the pressure on that. But most of the time will probably be smaller events at a smaller scale where we can actually bring those buses down, park in another area of the park. Another thing to bring up to in the design and in the concept of this, when we're working with Keith all the way through, we're really focused on this being an economic driver to really build the sales tax base here in Provo. So we chose not to include any concessions, internal concessions at the site, focus the entire site on field space and parking and sport restrooms, things like that. And then to drive all of that business out in the community. And so this was part of that, folks' intent to intentionally have a commercial space there to support this and then tie in with the other airport.
But I think the other thing that Doug's careful about, because I don't think Parks and Rec, always toots their horn as well as they should. I mean, one of the drivers for this is they recognize that the long-term operations and maintenance of this facility is important. And trying to find a way, if it's possible, to partner with somebody else on this piece of property to potentially create a revenue stream that might help supplement what it's going to cost us to run this, was another key component. I mean, one of the reasons for carving this piece out was not only because we know the sports park is going to need it, and anybody that comes to a soccer tournament is going to want a drink and a snack or gas or whatever, and it's better if they get it right here instead of driving to our community to get it. But also to say, if it's possible, if it plays out as we do the deal, could we actually get some of the revenue back off of that deal somehow to supplement the ongoing year after year operations and maintenance costs of the facility? So, I mean, I just think they've really tried hard. We're not the gold standard Parks and Rec department in the country for no reason. They've tried really, really hard to anticipate how do we design this in a way that is the best possible opportunity for Provo City and for our residents.
Okay, Councilor Christensen.
Yeah, I like the what you're presenting here. I was actually surprised that it's such a small space. 4 acres seems to be 5 acres seems to be inadequate. Is there a phase 2, 3, 4, and 5, or that really does it?
Yeah, it's just the 5 acres. It's an irregular shape that we really can't fit, field space on. It was just kind of that corner piece.
And so you're thinking that would a hotel?
Yes.
And perhaps blend in partnership with the surrounding properties that will probably also develop it.
I mean, they're starting to look just at that 5 acres to begin with, but I mean, they think that they could build a convenience store and a potential hotel on that site alone. And then they're looking at some of the other property that we own next to the airport to see if it could be expanded, because maybe it's not one hotel, maybe it's 2 at some point in the future, just depending on what the market demand is. But you know, if we're already at 1 million passengers a year at the airport, we're gonna go to 3 million very, very quickly. We're gonna need hotel accommodations. We're kind of assuming that that facility itself might generate as much as 1,000 hotel room nights per soccer event. So, I mean, there's gonna be a big, big demand, and so they're looking to see some of the adjacent property. And I've got a meeting with the head of facilities at BYU this next week to talk to them about what's their future plan. You know, originally they had talked about this property that's directly west of here being where they would put all their storage sheds and their mulching operation. So we were successful a year or so ago in persuading them that that was the highest and best use, and I think their vision shifted, but they have adopted a new vision. And so this is another piece of property next to them that we're trying to see if there's an opportunity to work with Provo, BYU, and a developer to maybe turn that into something as well. Maybe it's some kind of a portion of it becomes part of this as well.
Any other comments? Counselor Bogdan.
What is that space between what is that, 560 South, where 6 turns into like 560 South, and where the sports parks start? How much space is in between there?
North of our property there.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm not sure.
because from here, is it like butted right up next to that? Is there no more space than what was on the plan? Because the plan shows that there's a note above it. Can you flip back another slide? So we don't have any property, any buffer? So theoretically, people could park on that wonky road that goes up by the benches and walk down, or is there gonna be too much of a space, is what I'm asking?
But I think there will be quite a bit of space, and then I believe we'll be working with her and Public Works to make sure that everything in both championship lane are both signed.
Well, I think the other thing too, Doug, that you mentioned to me as we were talking about this is the interior design of the sports complex itself allows you to expand some of the parking as it is. I mean, I think you said you could get maybe a couple of dozen more spaces if at some point we needed those by some reconfiguring some of the parking lots or the roads, isn't that right?
Right, especially on the south end that isn't developed yet. The north end right now has the equivalent of 86 stalls per field, so it's really front loaded on the area that we completed north of Victory Way. And yeah, and that was really the goal from the very beginning, to have off-street parking, so interior parking, so that we wouldn't crowd these roadways. And have the situation you see at other sports complexes where your kids play that are just awful.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, it's like Fort Utah Park, it's the softball field, what is that, Footprinters Park, it overtakes the entire neighborhood. Everything. Sunset.
This is an example of doing it the right.
Well, but this is all the information that we need to get out to the public, because like I said, they're terrified. And so if there's a big space above there, this doesn't look like there's any space above there. But if you flip back one more slide to the master plan, it shows that there's a big, that big purple blob. Is that still there, or is that all sports park?
All I know is we have 100 acres at our property, and I'm not sure what goes around. What we're really doing is we're concentrating all the parking on site interior to the park and not planning on sprawling at all out into any neighborhood or any other street that's adjacent to the park.
And this is the neighborhood with all the farmers in it, so they're not very trusting when we say that, right? And because they have been burned several times by the city before. So yeah, that's why I kind of want to know how big that space is, or is it just all, because to me, that's a huge buffer, and that's something we can go back to the neighborhoods and say, like, you guys have this huge buffer between where your house is and where the sports park's can start.
This is a property that we own. Yeah, the future land use map just kind of identify that as potential,
Right. But right now, you're not going to get people using it as a parking lot or walking from someone's house down into the sports park, right? If that's just empty lot. Is what I'm saying, because that's a huge space, right? I mean, what's the closest right there is the guy that we bought the property for the airport. What's his name? That farmer. His is right there on the corner. And so if they park in front of his house, that's going to be a big long walk versus parking inside of the parking area of the sports park is what I'm saying. Right?
I did just quickly, sorry, I did just my phone, the measurement from the very top of that plane to, south. It's 900. Mary, can you introduce yourself? Oh, sorry, Mary Barnes, planner.
Thanks, Mary Barnes Planner.
All right, any more questions for Keith? Or Doug?
Just a quick question.
Gary Garrett. Is your mic on?
Potential additional hotel properties. And it's listed here in the notes, the permitted uses for the SC2 zone. The airport industrial commercial zone, would any of that need to be rezoned for these, or those are permitted uses also?
Yeah, it's all allowed within that, yeah.
Okay.
Well, the airport like here, I guess there's a better way to say that. The airport overlay anticipates that type of use.
Okay.
Depending on the current use, whether it's agriculture or whatever, it would probably have to be rezoned to a use that fits that within the airport overlay. Is that the right way to say it?
The airport industrial zone.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
All right, all right.
That's the plan.
Anything else?
Say it.
All right, thanks,
you.
Steve. All right, next, we have a discussion regarding ordinance amending the zone map classification of property located at 1098 North Geneva Road from the agricultural zone to one family residential with transferable developmental rights for speeding overlay. And this is presented by Nancy Robinson.
Okay, so this is just kind of what I mentioned to you last work meeting. We went back to planning commission to make sure that they understood that we were going to be adding an overlay to it to make it a receiving site. That's, these are just the area where it is, and staff determined that it would be helpful to have door lots, so we wanted to pursue the transfer of development rights from the east side. That current developer has 2 lots under contract, which would give the Bukers, I guess I've got something to go forward. So this is what they have in mind right now to do. A possible development could be these future things, and so they wanted to not restrict the Bukers from being able to have future development. So the transferring of those rights and buying the lots would give them that ability. The engineering or public works has said that there is no problem with the sewer capacity, and the doing this also is very beneficial because it will get us that road connection in the future. So I don't know if you guys have any questions. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm not supposed to be the one saying.
No, I appreciate everything that you guys have done to allow them to have future rights and to talk with them and Bill speaking with the Bukers, and I think it's a much better plan now that they're able to develop in the future.
Great.
All right, any other questions? Thanks, Nancy.
Okay, thanks.
We've definitely heard about this one quite a bit.
Yep.
All right, next, discussion regarding an ordinance. I don't know, if you guys want to take a break, we're running early.
Yeah.
Hey, let's take a break until 3:45. And we'll still be early. Yeah. Thank you.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
All right, next we have a business regarding an ordinance. Nope, that's the wrong one. We have a discussion regarding an ordinance amending the zone map classification of certain properties in the Oak Hills, Indian Hills, and Sherwood Hills neighborhoods to add the transfer development rights, making a TDR-S overlay zone. And this will be presented by Aaron Ardmore.
Yeah, this should be sorry. Yeah, I talked to Renee. About that. Okay. All right, so this is kind of part 2 of what was approved back in January, February by the council when we established chapter 1433B, the TDR overlay zone. So now we are being kind of a little proactive by addressing 66 of the sending sites and proposing putting that overlay on those properties. These are properties that have been identified as having a number of risks, whether that's slides, fault lines, rock falls. These are properties at risk of issues if they were built on. I wanted to make it perfectly clear in this, and I'll do it again tonight, that we are in no way forcing anybody to sell their development rights, that they can still look into what the costs and studies would be to try to develop their lot if they choose to. These are subdivided lots, so they're well within their rights to do that if it's not cost prohibitive. In our experience, we found that it is cost prohibitive to some of these people, and this overlay is an attempt to give them another option to get value out of the property. We've taken this through planning commission. The planning commission had some discussion on it, but in the end recommended approval to the city council 7-0, and felt like this was a good strategy to try to give some of these property owners a way out if they choose to do that, and just to try to protect the properties in the hill, the cities, future residents from some of these potential hazards. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. There was a question about noticing. All 66 of these property owners were sent postcards for the planning commission hearing, but they were sent to whatever address they had listed on their taxes. So they may or may not have gotten those, but we tried to notify them that way. We only had a couple come out to the planning commission hearing. I've received probably 2 or 3 phone calls from other property owners on these, just generally asking, what does this do to my property? What options does it give me? And they've been pretty satisfied with just, it doesn't really change anything, but it does give me another option. But if you have any questions for me now or for tonight, I can try to address those.
All right, any more questions for Aaron? Councilor Whipple.
So will we be recording anything with the county about these properties?
Eventually, yeah. So that's one of the steps here. So if there is somebody that wants to get their sending site certificate, we would mark what that site is, how many development rights they have for that site. Bill Pepperoni would sign it, and we would record it out of the county. And then when they are able to sell that to a developer, if the developer is successful in getting a receiving zone approved by the city council, that would be transferred to the receiving owner and have another certificate developed through our department for that.
So recording is only done if the property owners choose to go through this process.
Correct.
So there's nothing that's recorded with the county right now about this zone or the possibility of doing this.
That's correct.
So a purchaser doing their due diligence would not be able to get this information just looking at the title and county records. They would need to go and look at the city map and everything.
Yeah. Unless that property on the sending site was proactive about getting that signed and recorded on the title as a way of marketing it.
Oh, but they could proactively do that without a receiving site designated, so they.
Yeah, so if you look at 1433B110, it kind of spells out the process, and they have that ability to get the certificate from development services saying, I have this many development rights to send. And that's just the way for them to try to market it.
Okay, yeah, so that gives them a tool that makes a property that would be very difficult to build on look more appealing to a purchaser.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions for Aaron?
Just got a question about one of the properties, got me just a little confused, because there's one on one of the maps. If you could pull up. It's the map, just the road that goes up to the Y, Terrace Drive.
Is it 991 North Terrace?
Yep, I'm sure.
Yeah, so those are listed as Terra Growth properties. Right?
I'm
What does
sorry,
that-
I
what does that
don't
mean?
know all this.
I just didn't see the owner on the list, and I didn't know if that person was also contacted.
So yeah, each one of those that have been marked in orange or red on that map, we sent out a notice card to. A lot of them were LLCs that were set up. But we sent it to whatever their taxes go to.
Well, maybe I'll just talk to Bill afterwards.
We've talked with him considerably, Gordon and I.
Oh.
Is he here? Yeah.
There's just emails going back and forth
Yeah.
with one of the owners, Mr. Robinson, and we're trying to find out if he would like. to
And
be
number one,
included or
he can
not.
be taken out. If he wants to be taken out, he can be taken out. And we never designated anything on his property. The state did that. The state designates what's on faulty, has fault lines or, so we didn't put anything on his land that the state hadn't already done. We're just giving them another option on the land that the state has designated as
I thought that was a
problematic.
road property. Robinson is the owner?
Jeff Robinson's been emailing us about it.
Well, I know.
That's the question.
No, I'm talking about the ones across the street. The one to all those to the east, yeah.
Oh, that's different then.
Do you remember any of those road properties?
I can't recall all the owners. There's 66 of them. Yeah, we've got all the parcel IDs and sent the notice of cards to those tax record addresses. But if there's a specific one, I'd like to find out which that was and double check.
Okay, I'll talk to you after.
Oh, Councilor Garrett.
If I could just ask some basic questions there, and we may have covered this back in February, I can't recall. But if these, who knows when these plats were laid out and approved? 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I don't know if we know.
70 days.
Yeah.
In
The majority of
70
that's 80 days.
So if these are considered hazards now by the geostrata analysis, I guess if there's new technology available to us, or why were they approved to begin with 40 years ago as building lots?
I wish I was here 40 years ago. I don't know.
Yeah, I was about 40 years old.
You gotta ask older people.
Yeah.
You're just way too young to know stuff. No. Bill's old enough. Anyway, so yeah, development had a way different standard
Okay.
back, and every year it's gone better and more sophisticated. We used to see a lot more houses fall off cliffs and side of mountains and be torn apart. In fact, in these subdivisions, there were homes built on a lot that tore apart. Rocks have gone through some of the garages. And apparently that's not acceptable with our standards anymore, and so they're required to build under current building code, not the building code when they were accepted. So every time a new building code is updated, the city adopts the latest, and that includes the state geotechnical code, everything. So you don't grandfather in the date you were subdivided.
Okay, that would just require more retention and.
So in some cases, the ground's moving so much that you may not ever find an engineered solution. Some of these include building a platform, and you would have to rejack your house every 2 years so you can shut doors and windows. And so when people look at those options, sometimes it gets too expensive and too far out of a normal range of what a homeowner would expect to do to have a home.
So what about some of these lots that, so you look at these homes, for example, they're west of and surrounded by,
They're in a fault zone, they're in a slide zone.
they have no recourse at
No,
this point.
and so we're leaving status quo, we're not looking at any home that exists, we're just looking at existing lots. And like Aaron said, they can come in and go through the process to get a building permit. We've had several do that. And they have spent tens of thousands of dollars and weren't successful, so they have put themselves at financial risk because they borrowed the money. And they were never able to conclude. New people have bought the lots and they have started the process, and it's been a very horrible cycle that we've seen going on. Not on all the lots, but on a number of them.
Yeah.
So we're now saying the cycle can end once we put a concurring easement on it. People can end up still owning the property, use it, but they just don't have, they've lost the development right on the property.
If they sell.
And so my last question would be, comparing municipalities. Are we required to do this, or is this just given as an option for them to make themselves whole?
So this is just an option, so other communities have done TDR transfer density for other reasons than this. But this, I think, fits this situation very well. Our first TDR is coming to you, and it's sort of elegant. Maybe they explained it just really working out well.
So just to clarify, one thing he said, Gordon said that you aren't grandfathered in terms of the building code, building requirements and engineering requirements. They are grandfathered in terms of it's a platted lot. We have to respect it as a building lot. They have a building right to that. It's satisfying all of these engineering and building standards that makes it very difficult to do. Transfer development rights have been used much more widely for preservation of farmland or for preserving hillsides.
Okay.
This is a unique solution to a problem that's been hanging over our heads since the 1970s. And I think we're already getting indications that it's going to work. So yeah, it gives people an option they don't have now, but it doesn't make them do anything.
Okay, that's helpful background. Thank you.
All right, any other questions for Aaron? All right, thanks, Aaron. Next, we have a discussion regarding ordinance adjusting the common boundary between Provo and Orem along 2000 South in Orem. This will be presented by Jessica. Donnie. Donachie, thank you. With Development Services.
Okay, so the next three boundary line adjustments, you saw them back in February. They've already been approved. We weren't aware that they had to be certified the same way an annexation does, so we did not collect the documents and get them to the state in time to get that certification. So we're just bringing them back to get that new ordinance with the correct dates. Orem has already passed it. They did it at their council last week, and I have their ordinances and their impending back reactions ready to go, so.
And you, I think it was clear in the documentation, but nothing else has changed.
There are no other changes. It's still all the same boundary line adjustments that were presented in February. We just need to check the boxes.
All right, thanks, Jessica. It is all the same. So does anyone have any questions or concerns? All right, thanks, Jessica. Now you do the next one too, right? A discussion regarding ordinance suggesting the common boundary between Provo and Orem to accommodate a new residential development near the intersection of University Avenue in Provo and 800 North in Orem.
Chair, if you want to read in the next one too, she can
Let's
present
do it.
all of them.
Yeah.
Because it's the same issue.
Great, and a discussion regarding ordinance concurring with Utah County on the common boundary between Provo and Orem near the intersection of 1030 East in Orem and 2250 North in Provo.
Again, you've seen it all before, same maps. We're just gonna get that updated ordinance so we can get it certified and recorded.
Great. Any questions for Jessica? All right, thanks, Jessica. I don't think so. You presented before to us, haven't you?
No.
Oh, is this the first? Oh.
Welcome.
That was fast.
All right. Okay, a closed session has been requested. Oh, we're not. Oh, okay. Okay. So we will not be having a closed session.
We will not,
session.
huh?
we're gonna talk to you about something, so we're not gonna have a meeting.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Talk to us about some things we're not gonna have a meeting.
We're not talking to you about anything legislative, so it's not a meeting, it's not even the jurisdiction.
Oh,
We're just gonna give you some administrative items.
oh, okay, sounds good.
If there's no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council work meeting by unanimous consent.
Recording stopped.
Uh,
What's happening here?